A gute Woche. The Rebbe Zilgezunzen began the Farbrengen today that the kviyas of today's date, which is Chav Beis, 22 days in the month of Iyar, this is a date which we find in Inyan and Chumash of something that happened on this day. And he pointed out that in general, the kviyos of this year, from the beginning of the month of Nisan to the end of the month of Iyar, says regarding Sivan, it's debatable. But regarding the 2 months of Nisan and Iyar, the kviyas is exactly as it was the year that the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. What happened on Chav Beis Iyar? On Chav Beis Iyar, we find that when the month began, Chav Beis Iyar was the first Shabbos that the Yidden were receiving man every weekday. And it came Shabbos, they didn't have any man. So when it came Shabbos and they didn't have any man, so that's when Moshe Rabbeinu told them, Riyu, see, ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. Which incidentally, this pasuk of Ra'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos, the entire inyan of the Yidden being used to man, and then when the man stopped, this is in Pashas B'Shalach. And in Lekutei Torah, which is a seif of the Alter Rebbe Mamorim on weekly sedres, Lekutei Torah is on the Chomoshim of Vayikra Bamidbar and Devorim. However, there was one maimer in Lekutei Torah on Pashas B'Shalach, and I think there are a few on Pashas Pekudei. But in general, Lekutei Torah is the seif of the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim on the Chomoshim of Vayikra Bamidbar Devorim, as opposed to Torah Oyer, which is the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim on the Chomoshim of Bereshis and Shmois. So the first maimer, the beginning of the Lekutei Torah, begins with this maimer of Ra'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. Continue. Why Take explains us why Take is it that the Alter Rebbe chose to begin the Lekutei Torah with this maimer. So first of all, the Rebbe asked several questions in this inyan Taka that happened then on 22 days in the month of Iyar. Plus, in the contents of the psukim about this inyan. First of all, the pasuk there tells us that when the man became coming from Shamayim, the Yidden didn't know exactly what it was. Lo yodu mazeh, they didn't know what it was, so that is why they decided to call it man. When does the Torah tell us all this? The Torah tells us all this when the Torah is telling us about the Shabbos. In other words, once the man was coming down all week, Shabbos there was no man. Then the pasuk says that the Yidden didn't know what to do with it, how to refer to it, how to name it. V'lo yodu mazeh. That is why they named it man. And then the pasuk also continues that this was lizikaron livnei Yisrael. This was something eternal for the Yidden, remembrance. What does this mean? So we are told in Chazal that it's in Tzenes, a little jar of man was put away by Moshe Rabbeinu, and this was put away and stood with the Yidden for many, many years, to the extent that in later years, in the days of the Navi Yecheskel, when Yecheskel was criticizing the Yidden, why aren't they learning Torah properly? So the Yidden responded that they can't because they don't have the time, they're involved in Pandaseh. So Chazal tell us that Yecheskel took out this sincenes of man, this jar of man, and showed it to the Yidden to explain them that it happened already such an inyan, and when the Yidden will be dedicated to the learning of Torah, the Rebbe will provide all of their needs. However, this sincenes did not remain after the Bayis Rishon. Once the Bayis Rishon was destroyed, then this went along with the inyanim shenignazu. There are certain things which were hidden. I think it's 5 things which were hidden after the destruction of the Bayis Rishon, and did not come back to the Bayis Sheni, and one of them is also this jar of man. So the Rebbe is asking, First of all, why did the problem arouse? What to call this food which was coming from Shemayim? Why did the problem arouse on Shabbos? As soon as it came down, the Torah should have told us that the Yidden had a problem. They didn't know how to refer to it. Lo yodu mazeh. So it came down for a week's time. Everything was acceptable. Once it did not come for Shabbos, that is when the problem aroused. Lo yodu mazeh. They didn't know what it was. So the Rebbe is explaining that when the Yidden got the man, the Taka didn't know what it was. Didn't know. It went on for a week's time. Man began coming down on a Sunday. It went down for 6 days a week. And they saw something strange. They saw something strange. They didn't know what it was. And especially we know Chazal tell us that they were able to have all the tastes of man, any taste anyone desired, he had in the man. Then when they saw it didn't come on Shabbos, here they saw already something complete. It's a complete cycle of the thing. 6 days a week it comes, Shabbos it doesn't. Something which runs this way, so they didn't know what it was. So that is why, when does the Torah tell us that the Yidden didn't know what the man was? If the complete cycle of man, which is a week, that during the 6 days of the week it came, and on Shabbos it didn't, that is when the Yidden expressed themselves, lo yodu mazeh, and they were looking for a name, what to call it, and they didn't have no alternative, they decided to call it man. Another question which the Rebbe raised is, why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu told them now, Ru'u ki Hashem nasa lachem es HaShabbos? See, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given you Shabbos. Shabbos is something which Moshe knew about before. So why did he wait? All week he didn't tell them anything. Once he saw that the man does not come on Shabbos, that is when he went ahead and told the Yidden about it. Why didn't he tell them anything during the week? Why didn't he tell them anything earlier? Also, when did the Yidden take the tzintzenes, take some man, and put it into a little jar, and put it away to store? This also happened once they realized that on Shabbos it didn't come down. Again, the same idea. Here the Yidden started getting man, so they thought this is going to be something, a daily way of them being fed. Now it came Shabbos. Shabbos they saw it's not coming. So they saw there's already a system, some days it's coming, and on Shabbos it's not coming. This gave them the thought, this gave Moshe Rabbeinu the thought to go ahead and take some man and store it. It should remain lizikaron levnei Yisrael. I don't recall how the Rebbe answered the question, or if he answered it at all. Why Takim? Moshe didn't tell them about Shabbos before Shabbos. Moshe already knew about Shabbos. Why didn't he tell them before? But anyways, the Rebbe is continuing to explain that the man had this specialty, that it had all tastes in it. Now we know, for example, there's an inyan of birchas koyanim. What's the inyan of birchas koyanim? So as it's explained in Chassidus, the idea of birchas koyanim is to rush, to hasten the inyan. In other words, the inyan is there, it was already assigned for us. However, the bracha of the koyan helps to hasten, to rush, that this inyan should come yet faster. This is the whole inyan which we find in the Torah and Parshas Korach, with the inyan of Matei Aaron, the stick of Aaron, and the stick of Aaron began to blossom shkedim, almonds grow fast. It's all explained in Chassidus, because this is the idea of Aaron, this is the idea of the Kohen. His inyan is to rush an inyan which was already designated and assigned for us, but to rush it down lamata, that we should have it right away. The man is yet a deeper inyan, the Rebbe explains. The man does not have to come on that we should have to hasten the tastes of all different inyanim, that should come into the man. It is there already. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given the man with this unusual thing, that the man possesses within it all different tastes. And whatever one wanted to eat, this is what he had in the man. The Rebbe continued, this is the whole idea of the man, to bring out the betachon, the trust we are supposed to have in the Rabbeinu Shalom. And that is why the Gemara tells us, regarding Birchas Hamazon, regarding benching, find the Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu tikin Birchas Hazon. Who was the one that has composed the first bracha of benching, Hazon Esoilam Kuloi Betuvei B'chein B'chesed V'rachamim? This is the bracha which Moshe Rabbeinu composed. It's symbolic for Moshe to do it, because Moshe was the one that went through with the Yidden the inyan of the man. So we saw how the Rebbeinu Shalom is taka azonas olam kuloi betuvei b'chein b'chesed u'varachim. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the one who's feeding Yidden and feeding them and providing them with all their needs. This led Moshe that Moshe should go ahead and compose this bracha that we are constantly referring to whenever we bench in Birchas Hamazon. The Rebbe went on saying that with the koyach of the man, this introduced by Yidden and Ninyan, that a Yid can imagine something, imagine a desire to something, and the taste for it is there. It is right there. And the Rebbe said, Memela, the same thing is when Yidden are constantly demanding from HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the coming of Mashiach. And Yidden are complaining to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we want Mashiach now, we want the Inyan HaGeula. So it's also the pshat that Mashiach is here. And all we have to do is we have to be Zeicha. We have to merit that Mashiach should reveal himself, and we should have Mashiach, and Mashiach should take us out of Golus. And again, the Rebbe repeated how it's already the highest point, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also mis'abel im Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also in a level of sorrow, together with Yidden, for the fact that we are that long in Golus. Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu also wants that we should already go out of Golus. And it's only up to Yidden that Yidden, through their acts and their deeds, this will lead to it that the Mashiach will come and take us all out of Golus. This Shabbos is also the Shabbos of after Lag Ba'ima. Lag Ba'ima is the day of Rashbi, Rab Shimon ben Yochai. It's the day of his Yortzeit, it's his day, and Rab Shimon ben Yochai had a shaykhus to each and every Yid. And he's the author of the Zohar, and as he himself writes in the Zohar, that Bahai Sifra Dilach, with this Sefer, Bei Yifkun mibnei Yisrael mebei Gelusa. It will be with this Sefer that the Yidden will go out of Golus. In general, it's the Zohar, and to us, to be more specific, it is the inyan of Torah Chassidus in general. Which Torah Chassidus is through the spreading of Chassidus, as we know the famous quotation that this will lead to the coming of Mashiach. Bichlal, the Rebbe continues, in Nigle the Torah, we find an often expression in Gemara, Toshema, come and hear. In the Zohar, we find the expression Tochazi. What is the difference? Tochazi means come and see. Chassidus tells us and explains at length the advantages in vision over hearing. It is the inyan of chazi, of chizoyon, of seeing something. When one sees something, it has much more impact on him than when he hears something. So Memela, when we're talking in the learning of the Zohar, which is the learning of Pnimi Satayra, here we have Getlichkeit in a level of chazi, of chizoyon, of visioning it. Here the Rebbe says, comes back to the inyan which we began discussing in the first Sikha. The Alter Rebbe, the first Maimon, the Lekutei Torah, is based on the Pasuk, Re'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. Re'u, see. Why? The Rebbe explained that the Tzedek was the one who edited the Lekutei Torah. It was his Zaydet's Mamorim, the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim. The Rebbe said that the Frierdiker Rebbe related to us that the Lekutei Torah, the Tzemach Tzedek, edited from 2,000 Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe. He had 2,000 Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, and out of these 2,000, he chose which Mamorim to put into the Lekutei Torah. So we see how careful he was about editing the Lekutei Torah. And at the same time we find that Lekutei Torah, as mentioned before, is on the Chumashim of Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Dvarim. And here he begins the Sefer not with a Maimer on Vayikra, but with a Maimer in Parshas B'Shalach. Why? Because he dafki wanted to do this. He wanted to begin the Lekutei Torah with a Maimer beginning with these words. Re'u ki Hashem nasan lachem es HaShabbos. Re'u, vision. Because this is the whole lineage of what Chassidus is all about. The whole lineage, what Torah Chassidus teaches us, is how we can see godliness in the world. How everything in this world is penetrated with godliness, and if we look properly, we can be merit to see it. The Rebbe says furthermore, why Taka did he choose a pasuk in Parshas B'Shalach? Parshas B'Shalach is prior to Matan Torah. Matan Torah is discussed in Yisro. In other words, he's bringing out, even though on one hand, the world before Matan Torah was not as purified as after Matan Torah. Matan Torah had an effect on the entire world, that the entire world became edeler, became purified through the giving of the Torah. So the Tzemach Tzedek is quoting here a pasuk, which deals with what the world looked like before Matan Torah. And he's out to bring out that Chassidus can accomplish, that this is what Chassidus is all about, that even in the level of what the world was like before Matan Torah, we can also have a re'iyah, a vision in Elokus on that part of the world as well. The Rebbe says everything is accurate. Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe tell us that the Tzemach Tzedek edited the Likutei Torah from amongst 2,000 Mamorim? Why not more? Why not less? Why dafke 2,000? Rebbe says this corresponds to what Chazal tell us, Alpayim Shana Kodmo Torah L'Yolam. That Torah was created 2,000 years prior to the world. In other words, there's the level in Torah, how Torah is higher than this world. And at the same time, we are told that when we are neshama beguf, when we are in this world, we are zeicha to reach to godliness, to see the godliness, the getlachkeit which is in the world. Memela, that is why it's not stam an expression he said out of 2,000 mamorim. Everything is extremely accurate because he's trying to stress this thought how Torah is alpayim shana kodma Torah la'olam, Torah is prior to the world. In other words, which means Torah is higher than the world, and at the same time we are told that through learning Torah, specifically Pnimis HaTorah, which, as far as we are concerned, in our generations it was Nizgala durch Pnimis HaTorah, Torah Sachsides. This is the inyan of seeing Getlachkeit, how Getlachkeit is in this world. The Rebbe says here again we see how every expression is accurate. When we're talking about Chassidus, we always use the expression L'kshiyafutzu ma'yinosecha chutza. When your well springs will spread out to the chutza and reach the outside. Mayon, which we normally refer to as the word a well, however, also has the lettering of ayin, an eye. The letters ayin are there also. Ayin, yud, langenung, which spells an eye. This corresponds to the inyan which we are talking about now. The whole inyan of Chassidus is tochazi. We should be able to see, to bring us up to such a level of seeing Getlachkeit. Not just Toshema, which we derive from Nigla Torah, but a yet higher madrege, tochazi. Now we come to the third Sikha, which, as it seems, this is actually the reason of today's Farbrengen. The third Sikha, the Rebbe began how the whole inyan of Geula, which we're constantly talking about, Geula going out of Golas, is all dependent on Avas Yisrael. It was the lack of Avas Yisrael which brought to the Chum, that led to the Chum. Especially we know the famous story in Gemara, which the Gemara tells us about Kamtze and Bar Kamtze. That story tells us is a typically describes an inyan where there was a lack of Avas Yisrael. And it is through Avas Yisrael, by appreciating every Yid and expressing love to every Yid, Avas Yisrael to the extent of Achdus Yisrael, total unity amongst Yidden, this will lead to it that we will go out of Goles and come into Geula. And as the Rebbe always stresses, I mentioned it today again, Goles and Geula basically have the same letters. The only difference is Geula has an Aleph, Goles doesn't. In other words, when we refer to the Aleph, whom do we mean by the Aleph? The Rabbeinu Shloim, who is the Alufay Shaloim, the master of the world. And we listen to his wish and how dear it is to him to love every Yid. Especially, it has a shaykhs to talk about it today, because we're just talking about the inyan of Lag Ba'ima, which was the day of Rab Shimon ben Yochai. Rab Shimon ben Yochai was a disciple of Rabbi Akiva. We know how close Rabbi Akiva was to Rab Shimon ben Yochai. And Rabbi Akiva's message to us is how this is a quotation of Rabbi Akiva. The importance of loving every Yid. Meila the Rebbe continues. How do we express an action, an inyan of loving every Yid? This is by gathering with other Yid. When Yidden gather together, though everyone is different, ain't they say Shabbos, everybody has a different mind, a different thought. Everybody's entitled to his different, one different, being different than another. However, at the same time, when we gather together people, which each and every one of them is different, this is an expression of Avas Yisrael. And this is the greatness of a Chassidische Farbrengen. A Chassidische Farbrengen, when everybody gathers together. And here we have to understand the greatness of a Chassidische Farbrengen, there's the famous quotation from the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe said, Piskom min Shamaya Noches, which means a note came down from Shamayim, from heaven, to tell us that how great the accomplishments and achievements of a Chassidische Farbrengen are, that a Chassidische Farbrengen can accomplish more than Malach Michal can accomplish. So Mamela, the Chassidische Farbrengen accomplishes great inyan. How much more so when the Chassidische Farbrengen is in an appropriate time, which will be next Shabbos. Next Shabbos is the day before Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is the day when the Yidden gathered at Har Sinai. And we are told, the Pasuk tells us, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Har, that all the Yidden were there opposite Har Sinai. So Rashi quotes the Chazal, the Pasuk uses the expression Vayichan, rested, singular, not plural, because Klal Yisrael then was in the position of Keish Echad B'Leiv Echad. They were totally united. Which this was something which was a requirement before Matan Torah. A prerequisite before Matan Torah was the fact that it should be total achdus amongst the Keish Echad B'Leiv Echad. Now the Rebbe says he's suggesting and he's asking, and the Rebbe says it is a bakasha nafshis, which means a deep request from the Rebbe that next Shabbos all over the world be utilized to make Chassidische Farbrengens, and this will be a proper preparation before Matan Torah. And a Chassidische Farbrengen, the Rebbe says, is supposed to be with wine, koisi revoya, and especially we're told nichnas yayin, yotza soid, when one drinks wine, this reveals secrets. What do we mean by soid? The Rebbe said there's a chazal that soid refers to Mashiach. So again, this is something which will again bring closer the coming of Mashiach. The Rebbe also said that even if there are those that feel that they may have a financial problem putting together such type of Chassidische Farbrengens, though obviously this should be done in a way where everybody should participate. All those who are participating in the Farbrengen should participate in the costs of the Farbrengen. Because, the Rebbe added in, it's brought in Svarim, Chinam, to take something for free. This is an attitude which the Yidden had in Mitzrayim. The Pasuk Zachalnu es hadoga sha'achalnu b'Mitzrayim Chinam. The Yidden said when they were rebelling against Moshe that we remember the fish which we ate in Mitzrayim, which was given to us for free. So it's explained in Svarim that in Kedusha there is no such thing for free. In every Inyan Shel Mitzvah we have to participate with something. The Mela, when we're talking about a Chassidische Farbrengen, it's the same idea. Those participants should participate, and the Mela will cover the costs. However, if for whatever reason the Rebbe says it cannot happen, then those individuals there in that specific area, wherever they run into such a problem, should submit their request to the local Chabad headquarters in that part wherever they are, and they in turn will submit these requests here to the Rebbe's office, and all the expenses will be covered and taken care of out of the Rebbe's office. But again, Rebbe kept on reiterating on the importance of these Farbrengens, and the Rebbe says usually when he has an Inyan to request, he talks about it at the end of the Farbrengen. Today he's doing different to show the importance of this Inyan. And he's especially talking about it in the middle of the Farbrengen to show how important this Inyan is, gathering together, coming together, making Chassidische Farbrengens on next Shabbos. In fact, the Rebbe brought a halacha, that there's a halacha if one will be mispalel, the tefillah of Motzei Shabbos, while it is still Shabbos, he is yoitze. Next week, Motzei Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh. So Mamela, this shows us the obvious shaykhs between Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, to the extent that if one will decide when it's already the latter part of the day of Shabbos, and he will be mispallel the tefillah of Ma'ariv, and in the tefillah of Ma'ariv we have to say Yalav Yovi, which is said because of Rosh Chodesh, he is Yaitze. What does this show us? How close the Shabbos and the following day of Rosh Chodesh are. Furthermore, even in the way we daven, the way we have our tefillahs arranged, Mincha of Shabbos afternoon, we do not say any Tzidkos Chatzedek anymore. Why don't we say Tzidkos next Shabbos by Mincha? Because it is Erev Rosh Chodesh. So this again shows us how the day of Shabbos is tied closely with the day of Rosh Chodesh, which is following it, and that is the day of Rosh Chodesh Sivan. This day, as mentioned before, when the Yidden at the first time practiced the Keish Echad B'Leiv Echad. Mamela, the Rebbe continued again that this is the most appropriate thing to do next Shabbos all over. The Rebbe says it does not even have to be related in his name, wherever there's no need for it. No Inyan time. As long as that the Inyan should be accomplished, that Chassidish and Farbrengen should be taking place all over the world, and to involve more and more people in it, and see to it that more and more Yidden participate in these Farbrengens. The Rebbe says, being that we have a week left to prepare for this Shabbos, so let us utilize every day of the week. We know every day corresponds to a different midah, to a different sphera of the days. Memela, every day called Yoima v'Yoima Ovid Aviditei. Every day has its inyan. So Memela, let us utilize every single day of this week. Memela, we will utilize the complete cycle of the week to prepare ourselves for the next Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, we are guaranteed al pi teva, al pi nature, that if we will put in the proper koiches and the proper preparations and the proper strength and utilize the entire week for preparing all of these Farbrengens, then the success of all these Farbrengens will be such, l'mayla mederech hateva, totally outside the realm of nature, totally much higher than the realm of nature. As it's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe learns a Rashi in the Sedra of the week, as well as also a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos during the weeks that we recite Pirkei Avos. And also refers to the Rambam, the daily Shir of the Rambam. The Rashi in this week's Sedra, which the Rebbe learned, is a Rashi before Shlishi. Rebbe expressed himself, it's before we go into the Shir of Lag B'Omer. Lag B'Omer was Shlishi, the last pasuk, which is like an introduction to the Shir of Lag B'Omer. The Sedra begins with Im Bechukosai Telechu, Ves Mitzvosai Tishmeru V'Asisa Meisam, and then the Torah tells us what will be the reward that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us for learning Torah and observing His mitzvahs. And we go through quite a few psukim of bracha. Then we come to a pasuk which is pasuk tes, ufonisi aleichem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will turn to you. And Rashi explains that it means HaKadosh Baruch Hu says He will cease doing whatever He's doing and turn Himself and devote Himself only to us Yidden. V'yifreisi eschem, v'yirbeisi eschem, He will multiply us. And the pasuk concludes, v'akimoisi es brisi yitchem, and I will make my bris, my covenant with you. What does Rashi say? Rashi quotes the words "Vakimoisi as brisi itchem" and tells us as follows: Bris chadosha. This is a new covenant. Loike bris harishona sheifartem boisa. Not like the first one which you have destroyed. Ela bris chadosha. This is a new one. Shaloi tufa, which will never be destroyed. And Rashi quotes a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Shenema zo. V'chavti es beis Yisrael v'es beis Yehuda bris chadosha, loike bris, not like the previous covenants. The Rebbe says that Rashi, for the child who's gotten himself used to learn Rashi, he understands that when does Rashi comment something? When there's a need for Rashi to comment something. When there's no need, Rashi doesn't say anything. Also we know that Rashi is extremely accurate, not only with the words of his commentary, but also which words of the psukim that he quotes. Rashi here obviously is out to explain what the word bris means. The bris. Rashi does not just quote the word bris from the pasuk. Rashi quotes more forwards Why is there a need for Rashi to quote all of these words? Furthermore, the idea of Yidden having a bris with the Rebishter, of us having a covenant with the Rebishter, this is something which is not new to the child. Child is well aware of it. This takes us back to the days of Avram. With Avram, the Rebishter made a bris. There was a krisis bris with Avram. There was a krisis bris with Yitzchak, and we had one by Matan Torah. So the child who's learning Chumash is well aware of the concept of a krisis bris. Rashi finds a source to enlighten us. What do we mean by a krisis bris, that this is a new type of a covenant? Rashi has to quote a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Why? We have the concept of bris mentioned constantly in the Torah. So the Rebbe is explaining as follows. We're learning the psukim here. We learn in Bechukosai teleichu, ves mitzvos tishmeru vasisa moisa. If we will listen to the mitzvahs of Hashem, then we will be rewarded with what the Rebbe will give us. He will do this, he will do that, he will give us all the brachas. And the brachas can go on, will be multiplied and benched from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Here comes in another idea. The Rebbe says that his covenant with us will be reaffirmed. What is this, a bracha? It's not a bracha, obviously. Obviously, you know where this pasuk should have said? Right away at the beginning. If you will go in my chukim, which Rashi explains means learning Torah, and you will learn my mitzvahs, and also you will adhere to the bris, to the covenant which was made between me and you, then you will be rewarded with all these mitzvahs. In the middle of all the brachas, HaKadosh Baruch Hu throws in a bracha, this pasuk doesn't belong here altogether. This is a pasuk which, if talking about this inyan, this should have been said at the very beginning of the Seder, where the Torah discusses what the Yidden are putting in. The Yidden are learning Torah. The Yidden are being Mekayim mitzvahs. Not only that, we are also sticking to the bris, which was made between the Rebbeinu Shalom and us. If it's a pasuk here, so the child is wondering, how does the pasuk come here in the middle of the brachas? So Rashi has to quote this whole pasuk. Vaki moisi is brisi yitchem. The shaila is, how does the Vaki moisi is brisi yitchem fit in over here? So Rashi tells us, this is brisi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. It's a special covenant which he made with the Yidden. Something which was not made until now. So it has you cannot compare it to the bris which was made with Abraham. You cannot compare it to the bris which was made by Matan Torah through Moshe. You cannot compare it to the bris which was made with Yitzchak and Yankov. This is something completely different. This is a new thing which until now was not in existence. This is a tremendous closeness which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is promising that he's going to have with the Yid. And this is a bracha from the Rebishter. He's telling us that the Rebishter is going to be associated with us to such an extent. He's making a covenant, he's making a bris, something which loy tufar, which can never be destroyed. Where do we know about this? Rashi brings a raya from a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. We know Chassidus tells us that Yirmiyahu, by the name, we can understand what was going on in his days. Yirmiyahu stems from the word mar, bitter. Yirmiyahu was within a bitter time for Yid. It's always explained in Chassidus, Yeshayahu stems from the word Yeshua, assistance, help. On the contrary, Yirmiyahu is mar, bitterness. And in Yirmiyahu, which is the Navi which represents bitterness for Yidden, he also was the one that stressed this pasuk. V'charati is Beis Yisrael v'Beis Yehuda bris chadosha. Even he, in his days, it was also felt. It was bris chadosha, a new type of a covenant. Loi ki bris, nothing like the brisen that were before. Something completely new. Because the child here is learning Chumash. So the child who's learning Chumash knows that we're in Golus. Knows that he's well aware of the fact that we're in Golus, and he's well aware that there was a bris with the Rebishter which was disturbed, which was hufar, which was broken. However, here he is told there is something deeper between the Rebishter and Yidden. deeper than that bris which was hufar. This is a special type of a bris. The Rebbe kept on stressing brisi. The Rebbe is addressing himself to this bris. It's a special personal bris between him and the Yidden. And this is something which is a bris chadosha. This is a new type of a covenant which until now was not in existence. And this is something which the Rebbe here has given to the Yidden as a brach. In Pirkei Avos, today it is the 5th Perik. The truth is that the conclusion of Pirkei Avos is with the 5th Perik. The 6th, which we are going to recite next week, is really not part of Pirkei Avos. It's a Beraise, which is, notice, not a Svarim, it's referred to as Kinyan Torah. It's a Beraisa which teaches us how we acquire Torah. Being that it is the Shabbos before Shavuos, we are told all the greatness of Torah and how we go about acquiring Torah. So Pirkei Avos really finishes with Perik Chamish. What is Pirkei Avos all about? Pirkei Avos is really Mila de Chasidusa. Advices, words of Chasidus. What do we mean by Chasidus? We mean Lifnim Mishuras Adin. More than the obligation of din. There is what halacha requires us to do, and if we go and fulfill above and beyond the halachic requirement, lifnim mishuras hadin, this is what a chassid is, and this is Pirkei Avos, Mila de Chasidusa. Let us look into the last Mishnah of Perikei. The last Mishnah is a quotation which begins Hu Hayayma, not something which somebody once said. Hu Hayayma, he would often be referring to it. He was often quoting this. What is it? Ben Chomesh Shanim Lamikra. That if a child is 5 year old, that's when he learns Chumash. Ben Eser LeMishnah, a 10-year-old learns Mishnah. Ben Shloish Esrei LeMitzvah, a 13-year-old, he becomes Bar Mitzvah, and so forth. 15-year-old, he learns Gemara, etc. Is this an Indian of Mila de Chasidusa? If a Yid becomes Bar Mitzvah to the age of 13, it's every Yid becomes Bar Mitzvah to the age of 13. There is no Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. We're not saying that somebody does beyond the call of duty to accept the yoke of Bar Mitzvah at the age of 13. The Rebbe says those commentaries that want to say, the fact is age of 13 is not enough. Al Pei Halacha, we need that the child should also have Shtei Seiros, should also have here in the proper places. So the Nayis, there's those commentaries that want to say that the Chiddush, what is new in this Mishnah is that even though the child has not bared the hair in those appropriate places, still, when he comes to the age of 13, he accepts upon himself the yoke of mitzvahs. The Rebbe says it's very hard to learn such a pshat because we do not know of any practice to go ahead and examine children when they come to the age of 13, to go ahead and examine them if they have the 2 hair in their proper place or they don't. We know that a Ben Shloish Esrei becomes Bar Mitzvah, and we put him on the Chazakah that he does have the 2 hair. So again, what is the Mishnah telling us all about? The Rebbe is explaining there are 2 different ways of chinuch. Mishnah is telling us how we go about raising our children. That a 5-year-old, we have to teach him Chumash. A 10-year-old, we teach him Mishnah, and so forth. Rebbe expressed himself in Yiddish. There's chinuch von a Yid. When chinuch comes from Yidden, education comes from Yidden. However, there is something deeper, which is called a Yiddische chinuch. And the Rebbe explained. A child is in Cheder. He's in Yeshiva. And the child in Cheder, in the olden Chadarim, there used to be a kanchik. Kanchik would mean the type of belt which the Rebbe would whip the children when the children are not behaving properly. The Rebbe says the child is learning fairly well. Sometimes he needs the Malamed, his Rebbe, to remind him that in order he should be learning well, he reminds him that there's a kanchik on the wall. The Rebbe says that the good Rebbes, the good Malamdim, really didn't have to use them. It was enough that they would have the kanchik, the belt hanging on the wall. And when they wanted to scare the children, they would just remind them that there's a kanchik on the wall, there's a belt that they could be maybe whipped with, on the wall. So the child is learning, and sometimes the kanchik helps, the reminder of the kanchik helps, and not always it helps. Sometimes it doesn't. This is how we find the nature of children. Then the child comes home. Child comes home, finds his mother. His mother's tired from her housework. And the father is definitely tired. He's coming home from a day of work. And he's trying to get his, Rabbi expressed himself, his vechere, which means his supper. He's trying to have a peaceful supper. The question is, do they have time to devote themselves with these little youngsters and to review the Chumash which the child learned and to tell the child the story of Chumash? Rabbi mentioned that in the olden days, the mothers used to relate to their children stories of Chumash. If the child was still younger, his mother would tell him stories which he didn't learn about yet. If he was a little older, she would review stories with him, or stories which he didn't learn yet. And he says the mothers would relate it with such an enthusiasm that this enthusiasm was instilled into the child as well, to such an extent that gam ki yaskin lo yosur mimenu. There's a pasuk, chanoich lanar al pidalkis, educate the child on his way, to the extent that when he will grow older, this will not part from him. The Rebbe says the mothers would relate it in such a way that the taka didn't part from the child. He says the mothers did not read the stories of the papers for the children, or the newspapers, but the mothers related stories of Chumash to the children. And Mamela, this gave children a different type of the chinuch. When we look at it, that when a child is taught an aleph, aleph is an aleph, it's the first letter of the aleph. You could look at it that way. You could look at it different. You could look at it that the aleph, this is the aleph of Anoichi. And when you teach a child Kometz Aleph, this is the Kometz Aleph of Anoichi. When you look at it that way, this is a completely deeper look at chinuch. And this is what the Mishnah here is talking about. The Mishnah isn't merely talking about the 5-year-old who's beginning to learn Chumash. The question is, how are the parents treating him? What type of an involvement do the parents take in his chinuch? Father, mother, how do they look at the aleph which the child is learning? Is it just that the child is stopped learning an aleph? Or do they realize that this aleph reflects Anoichi Hashem Elokecha? When we look at it, that this is the aleph, the Kometz Aleph that the child is taught, is the Kometz Aleph from Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, then we look at it completely different. This, the Rebbe says, is not only chinuch von Ayiden, chinuch that comes from Jewish parents, this is already a Yiddish chinuch. This is a much deeper type of chinuch, and this is what the Mishnah here is talking about. Mishnah here is talking about that things could be done. In other words, if I may use these words, things could be done in a very dry and routine way, and things could be done with warmth, with inspiration, with varmkeit, with a chayis, with a geschmack, and this is what the Mishnah here is demanding from us. That when we're going, Hu ha'ya'ima, he was always saying it, and this is the proper preparation before Matan Torah. And this is why we learn these Mishnahs before Matan Torah. To realize that when we're dealing with the chinuch of our children, it has to be done not just in a dry and routine type of way, it has to be done in a completely different way. It has to be done in a form of sincerity, dedication, that any and every chance parents have, that they can dedicate to the chinuch of their children, it has to be done. And this is what the type of chinuch the Mishnah here is demanding from us. And this is already an inyan of Milah de Chasidusa. This is Lefnim Meshuras Adin. It's not just a chinuch von a Yid, as the Rebbe kept on expressing himself. It's a Yiddish chinuch. Again, later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again reminded very strongly about making Farbrengens next Shabbos, and towards the end of the Farbrengen, he concluded again, requesting everybody to relate this wish that next Shabbos should be utilized properly with proper Farbrengens. And the Rebbe mentioned, when he mentioned it at the end, that he's spoken about it 3 times throughout the Farbrengen, so Gimel Pamim 3 times is already a Chazokeh. So this strengthens the request how he wants it, that throughout the entire world, the next Shabbos should be utilized to make proper Farbrengens and proper preparations for Matan Torah. The Rambam In today's Rambam, for those who learn 3 prokim a day, it deals with the halachas, hilchas naira psula. These are the halachas of an oines, mefate, meitzishemra, meaning of one did not act properly and he forced a girl or he talked her into it, and there are dinim in the Torah, how he's supposed to define that he's supposed to pay, and all the details which the Torah tells us, and it's told in the detail in the Rambam. So first of all, the Rebbe spoke about this inyan in 2 ways. First of all, he spoke about it in the sense that Yidden are also a naira ktana. Knesset Yisrael is considered like this young little girl who are learning about in halacha. In halacha, these halachas apply only when he has done it and she's not a gedola yet. If he started out with one who was a gedola, the halachas are different. The Rambam also explains it in the text. So Klal Yisrael, the Rebbe says, are compared to a naira ktana, to a youngster. And Memela, we are the kala of the Rebishter. Knesset Yisrael, the Yidden are considered like an Isha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is considered like the Ish. And again, the Rebbe explained it in the way how it is forbidden for anybody to start up with this Nara Ktana, who is Knesset Yisrael, who is the Yidden, or do them any harm in any way. Later, the Rebbe referred to the Sefer HaChinuch. And the Sefer HaChinuch, the Rebbe says the Sefer HaChinuch corresponds with the Rambam in many inyonim. And he explains his shittas in Minyan HaMitzvahs corresponds to the shittas of the Rambam. And when the Sefer HaChinuch explains this inyan of the one who was a mefate, or he was a ma'anes, or a moitzishemra, he tells us that the reason of putting a fine on this person, the Torah tells us that there are various fines that the individuals have to pay. The fine is so that this novel, this menuvel, should not repeat this act again. Now here the Rebbe based the continuation on the inyan which he spoke about the word novel. Novel means a very undesirable person. Now the Rebbe quoted that there's an interesting Ramban. The Ramban tells us that a person can be a novel Birshus HaTorah. What does this mean? A person can circumvent and do things where he's doing everything al pi halacha, and at the same time he's really acting very undesirable. And this is what the Torah tells us. The Ramban continues, Kedoshim tiyu. A Yid is supposed to remember that we are not just to follow halachas. A Yid is supposed to remember that in addition to that, we are holy. There's a certain sanctity amongst Yidden, and this stems from where Ki Kodesh Ani, because the Rebishter is holy, and this sanctity was related to the Yidden. Memela, when we're talking about Halakha people, every act has to be accordingly. A lot of times, we can start in our own lives. We find it as well. We find certain ways out of doing things and certain heterim for doing things. So on one hand, we found a heter to do it. But on the other hand, it is considered a novel. He's doing something wrong, something totally wrong, and at the same time, it is B'shus HaTorah. And here the Rebbe quoted a very interesting expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe used to express himself, Avos metornish, tornish. There's something which we are forbidden to do, which we are not allowed to do. We're definitely not allowed to do, no question about it. But the Rebbe continued, Vos me meg darf man nicht. There are many things which we are allowed to do it. But the question arises then, do we really need it? Or can we survive without it? And when we approach life with such type of an attitude, then this is living up to a standard of Kedoshim Tiyu. Definitely it is not Chas v'shalom in the classification of being a novel B'shus HaTorah. This is what Torah demands from us. Kedoshim Tiyu. A Yid has to uplift himself to be a Halakha Yid. A Halakha Yid is the one who lives up to a type of a standard of was metornish, tormendach nicht. And was me meg, darf man nicht. A gute Woche.